Welcome back, everybody. Of course, this is Dr. Keith McNally, and this is the Question Guide podcast. We are again, of course, in season 2, and I am here with, and I'm going to get this right, retired Lieutenant Colonel Oakland McCulloch. Did I
That is
get that
right.
close enough?
That is perfect, Keith.
Fantastic. And so, by permission, I get to call you Oak for the rest of the conversation. Now,
Absolutely.
now you wrote a book, and here's the book, and so I'm giving everybody a preview. It's Your Leadership Legacy. And of course, it always has a very interesting cover picture. I'm trying to get the light out of it, but it's you facing sideways. But I'm not here to talk about your picture. I'm actually really interested in your ability and your experience in training future leaders. In the book, you actually talk about you being in command of an I think it's in Alabama too, if I
Yeah,
remember
it's in the
correctly.
University of South Alabama in Mobile.
About you were put in command of the ROTC program.
That's correct.
Okay. And I think that's a real, and my experience was with Army ROTC back long, long time ago, at East Carolina University. And it was after I got out of the Marine Corps. But I want to know more about your philosophy, the training experience, the mentoring experience, and really, how do you develop leaders through the ROTC program? I think that's really essential. And I've
Yeah.
talked enough, and so I need to start asking questions. So where do we get started in this conversation? Tell me what the ROTC program really, what's that all about? What is the ROTC program?
Yeah. So the United States Army, there are three ways to get a commission to become an officer in the United States Army. One of them is West Point, the United States Military Academy, which most people have heard of and understand that piece.
Mhm.
Then there's Army ROTC, Reserve Officer Training Corps, and that's at the college level in colleges other than the academy. So there are 274 host programs. Right now, I'm at Embry-Riddle. When I was running a program, I was at University of South Alabama. You mentioned Eastern Carolina.
Mhm.
There's 274 host programs, and then each program generally has 2 or 3 or 4, or some of them up to 7 or 8 partner schools that are associated with that host school ROTC. Like mine now here at Embry-Riddle that I do the recruiting for, we have Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, I have Stetson University, Bethune-Cookman University, and Daytona State College. So if you add all those up, there's about 1,200 colleges you can go to and do ROTC. And then the third way to get commissioned is through officer candidate school. So you enlist, you apply, they accept you, and then you go through the officer candidate school. So ROTC is a class just like any other class on campus when you do it at the school. So you sign up for whatever you're going to major in. Let's say you're going to major in business. Then that school will tell you, okay, here are the courses you got to take over the next 4 years if you want to graduate with that degree. If you do Army ROTC, then you take one Army ROTC class each semester. So it's a class, a lab, physical training, and it's a little bit of field training exercise.
Okay. So, but it's not considered an actual major or minor. It's just additional
It is
class.
a minor at some
Oh,
schools. Like
oh,
Embry-Riddle offers it as a minor. South Alabama offered it as a minor, but some schools don't.
minor as defined in military science?
Yes, military
Okay.
science minor.
Okay.
Yep.
So, but the design and purpose of the Reserve Officer Training
Core.
is Corps is designed to create leaders. I'm
That's right.
assuming, because
Yep.
that's kind of the part and parcel of what it means to be an officer. Yes?
Correct.
Okay.
So the difference, though, between West Point, United States Military Academy, and ROTC is at West Point, you're going on active duty. One of the great things about ROTC, Army ROTC, is that you get to choose. If you want to go in the National Guard or Reserve, then you take your degree, whatever you got it in, you go find a civilian job. And then 1 weekend a month, and 2 weeks in the summer for 8 years, you put your uniform on and do Army stuff. The rest of the time, you're doing your civilian job. So when I talk about ROTC and my job as a professor of military science, when I was producing second lieutenants, I always told people I'm producing leaders for the Army and for the nation, because a lot of my students decide they want to go out in the civilian world and use all of that leadership training that we provided for them in their civilian job and during their job as a reservist or a National Guard officer as well. But most of their time was in the civilian world. So they were using all that experience and all that knowledge that we gave them in that job, passing it on to civilians. So it's not just for the Army. Leadership is leadership. Whether no matter where you learn it, no matter where you practice it, leadership is leadership.
But I like that. And so leaders for the Army and the nation. And so but training leaders is is a challenge.
It is a challenge, absolutely.
Training people to think about perspective in a different way. Now, throughout the book, you quote, leadership gurus, political, military, high-ranking officials, and all of their great quotes. But at the end of the day, leadership has to be, defined and identified in certain ways. And so people are involved, objectives are involved, character is involved. And did I miss anything? Because leaders do something, but they interact with people to do it, but they
Right.
have to have high character and high qualities in order for people to trust what they're saying and doing.
Yeah. Well, leadership is all about trust. If you don't
Okay.
have trust, nobody's going to follow you, period. And there are ways to build trust with people. And I was on a show that I don't know, last week, I think, and I was talking about ways to build trust with people. But it is all about trust. And when I took over the ROTC program there, I called my people together, the people who were working for me, and I said, look, we got to take care of people.
Well,
We got to
can we
set the
start with the back end?
sure,
It was
sure.
not performing well.
No, it was not. So
And
I took over a program that had 53 cadets in it, and um, and we had not made our mission, produce the right number of lieutenants in 7 years.
wow.
So I knew I had to make some changes, and one of the changes was in the culture, and the culture had to be that we were there for one reason and one reason only, to produce leaders, to turn these young men and women into lieutenants in the United States Army.
So what happened to the culture in those 7 years that because the army is the army is the army. You would think that regardless of where the army is, the army culture stays the same,
You would think
whether
so, but it's
whether it's
not
on a
true.
college campus or out in the field. Because I know
So,
in the Marine,
so
go ahead. I'm sorry.
yeah. So here's the problem: is that especially in ROTC programs that are away from the flagpole, so they're out in wherever, and some of them, every college is a little bit different. Let's just leave
Right,
it that
right,
way.
right, right.
Um, so, and every lieutenant colonel who's running those programs are a little different, and they're going to run their programs. Although there's certain things they're supposed to do according to cadet command in the Army, they still have some leeway in how they do things. And if somebody just doesn't have the character, or they just whatever for whatever reason they they aren't doing the things that are keeping people in the program or bringing people into the program. Maybe they don't want to work that hard. Maybe they've already started their retirement. Whatever reason, programs are different, and the character and culture in them are different.
So instead of being defined by the army, these ROTC programs are defined by the person leading the program.
Quite a bit, yes.
Okay. And
Now
does that go?
we teach Army values and we teach the Army culture, but that doesn't mean you got to live it. That's the
Well,
problem.
there's a significant part with it's not even the whole chapter, it's like a piece of it where you fired somebody. I mean, and it's in
Yeah,
the book, so I'm not speaking out of line.
yeah,
One of the when you took over the program, you had a meeting with your people and you said exactly what you just told me is our focus now is not on who we are, but our responsibility to the cadets. And it's
that's
literally
right.
what you communicated. And then as I remember the situation was, and I'm not, I guess it's an army person, I would assume, because you had
It
to
was
go,
a no, it was a contractor.
okay, because you had to call command, your command,
Right.
and kind of communicate what happened and what your intentions were. And because you've already had the meeting and you were establishing the culture that you wanted to establish to build this program up. And the first thing that you recognize is he told this cadet, I'm busy now, go away. And like,
Yeah.
that was basically it was a violation of what you were trying to do.
Yeah.
And so I think that day, if not within a week or so, you had your conversation was pretty short and sweet, get out.
Yeah. That was that day. It was within an hour.
So, so, but I don't remember what happened afterward. And so, and maybe go ahead.
Yeah. So as I was walking by, I told him in the meeting, I told all of the people that were working for me, look, we are here to take care of the cadets in the
That's
program.
right. Yeah.
That's why you get paid, plain and simple. And I said, and we have to set the example for them every day. I said, and it starts with me. I'll set the example for you and the cadets, and then you got to set it for the cadets. I said, if I ever catch you violating either one of those two things, you will no longer work here. And so
Wow.
I don't know, about 3 weeks later or something like that, 2 or 3 weeks later, I was walking down the hall, and as I was walking by this gentleman's office, I saw a cadet knock on the door. And as I walked by, he had his feet up on his desk. He's drinking a Coke and he's talking on his cell phone. And he tells the cadet, go away, I'm busy, come back
Right.
tomorrow.
And I think that's what irked you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, come on. So I walked into my office. I called my boss and his boss because he was a contractor, and I
Mhm.
said, "Look, this is what happened." I said, "I'm firing the guy," and they both said, "Fine. That's your
Wow.
prerogative."
There was
That's not,
no argument there either. It was
no,
like,
no
you
argument
wouldn't even give him a
whatsoever.
second chance.
No, because and I probably would have, except I knew I had to change the culture.
Right.
And I knew I had to set that example and say, okay, I'm not kidding. This is the culture and this is the standard. And if you don't meet it, then you're not going to be here. So then I went right back in there and I told him that he was
And
fired.
he rebutted. He said, "You can't fire me." I mean,
Yeah, he told
that's what
me,
you said.
yeah, he said, you can't fire me. I said, I think I just did. In fact, I know I just did.
Call
Pack
your
your stuff
boss.
and get out. And he did. He left.
Cool. Which is good.
Yeah.
And you know, I, I, every time I reflect on that one story, because it was the most impactful of all the things that's going on in this book, it was the most impactful story because you outlined it, you detailed it, and you made an action. Um, and I was wondering how that one action kind of changed the culture
Yeah.
and everybody else's perception of you and what their expectations of themselves. Can you talk to that a little bit? Just
Absolutely.
for a
So the
moment?
next meeting, because I didn't want to set up a culture of fear.
Right.
That wasn't my purpose. So the next meeting, I explained what happened, and I said, "Look, the, there there is a difference between making a mistake and making a decision not to do something that is right. And leaders do what is right all the time. Even if it's not in your best interest, you still do what's right. That's how you build the trust. That's part of how you build trust with people." I said, so don't fear that if you make a mistake, I'm going to fire you, because that's not going to happen. We all make mistakes. Nobody is perfect. I keep trying to convince my wife I am, but she's not buying it. None of us are perfect. Okay. We're all going to make mistakes. So I wanted to make sure that I let them know that the culture I'm trying to build is not a zero defect culture, because we all are going to make mistakes. The culture I'm building is to make decisions that are good decisions. And if it doesn't work out, okay, those kinds of things happen. So I told them that, and I will tell you that the culture started to turn around immediately. People understood why they were there, and I just emphasized it every time. Every time I was in a meeting, we talked about the importance of taking care of people. I told them, absolutely, I don't care what you're doing. If I tell you to do something and you're doing it, and a cadet walks up, then you stop what I told you to do and you take care of the cadet. That's
Mhm.
that's why we're here. And I did the same thing. I was on the phone with my boss talking to him about something, and a cadet knocked on my door, and he was crying. And I said, "Boss, I'm gonna have to call you right back." I said, "I got a cadet I got to deal with." And I hung up the phone, and his father had just died, and we had to get him out of there and get him home. But that, again, that's why we were there. So, and it works. I had 53 cadets when I took over. 3 years later, I had 179 when I handed off to the next lieutenant colonel.
So, in order for you to communicate the culture, one, you had to communicate it to the people that you're working with, and I'm going to say with, not their work,
Yeah,
you know, but you also had to communicate that to people who you're working for. And
that's
so
right.
the people who are above you and just in rank and support have to understand what you're trying to accomplish. Because even, again, I'm going back to the book in your own words, people thought you were going to fail.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because you went in there, because when it was handed to you, or the mission of taking over the responsibility for this ROTC program, and it was already in a failing situation, people thought you were just going to step in and perpetuate whatever culture was in there.
Yeah.
And you made a decision that that was not what you were going to do. So,
Yeah.
but then you had to communicate that to people around you, the people
Yeah,
above you.
and I did, and the my boss directly above me, who's a great guy, and lives in North Carolina, by the way. He's retired. He retired.
Near Greenville. Oh,
No,
we're
not
Fort
quite
Bragg.
there. No,
Uh,
just out in the country. He owns a farm.
okay.
So, but he retired a colonel, and he supported me 100%. I explained to him what I was trying to do, and he gave me 100% support. Um, the 2 years that I worked with him.
Wow.
The third year, I had a new boss, and not so much, but that's okay.
Oh, I mean, he did. Okay. Well, we won't have to go there, but you got the support, you communicated your needs, and that, so emotionally and cognitively, how did that inspire you to actually go in and take care of business? Knowing that you had the support needed.
Yeah, I mean, I knew that if I needed to do something or if I needed a resource, all I had to do was get on the phone, and it just made me work even harder to change the trajectory of the program, to change the face of the program, and and not only did I communicate all that to the people that I worked with, my cadre and above, but I also communicated it to the cadets. And one of the things I found out was that once they understood and they started trusting us that we were going to take care of them and we were doing the right things, they were our best recruiters. They were going all over campus saying, you know what, you need to come do ROTC at least for a semester to see
Right.
if you like it.
Right.
And I don't know how many cadets we picked up that way.
And I'm going to come back to that because that's actually a conversation I have with a colleague of mine. But going back to the idea of culture, and to be quite honest, this is not the direction I intended for this conversation to have, but I like where it's going, because when when the cadre, the cadets, the 50 some odd that were currently in the program, and they were now experiencing something different. They experienced something before,
Right.
and you can't even imagine what they were thinking or feeling, is this, because if their first experience was of an ROTC or the Army was this, and I don't even want to cuss, but I want to cuss just a second. This lackluster ROTC program,
Yeah,
what is their expectation of the Army as a bigger picture? And so
absolutely.
you're really establishing at that level, a culture of a bigger of a entity, Army. And heck, went back in the day, and I'm 53, Army, Marine Corps, whatever, service you wanted. There was always these mottos on TV that,
Right.
really inspired you that this is something awesome to belong to, right?
Right.
And then they're experiencing it real life, and it's like, well, this isn't what I signed up for. And so you had to change a whole lot. So what does that change? How did that change actually start, other than you communicating a different set of values to your people?
So that communicating that, but then setting the example, and I think that's so huge for leaders to, I, again, I was at a university. There weren't a whole lot of Army guys in Mobile, Alabama. There was me and my cadre and some National Guard and reservists, but there weren't a whole lot of people. So, like, the people in my neighborhood had no idea what Army officers do. They had never been in the Army. They just had no idea. And a bunch of them would ask me, so what do you do? And I would tell them, I produce officers for the Army, And I had to go through all that. I said, but really what I do, my number one job, in my opinion, is every day make every one of those cadets that are in my program want to be like me, make them understand what it means to be an officer in the United States Army, how you walk, how you talk, how you interact with people, how you make decisions. All those things are huge in helping them understand what they're getting into.
Uh, and I like that because you're now their mentor and their role model. So
Yep.
that's all part of what being a leader is all about. But what are the experiences? And so, in order to take a group of young men and women and transform them, now I'm going back to boot camp days, and
Yeah.
boot camp's a little bit different experience.
It is a little
Uh,
bit different. Yeah.
but you're now taking people in college, they've got some sense of their own reality, they've got a sense of responsibility. They joined you on intent, it was their intention to become an, ROTC, Army officer, whatever that meant to them. They have to experience something. They had to experience some type of something that
Yeah.
said, I'm doing the right thing for me, for my family, my community, my nation.
Yeah.
What were those experiences that you gave your cadre that helped them understand the bigger picture?
Yeah, so I think one of the things I immediately did after I took over was I started I changed the way that our cadets were the company, the organization. So instead of having all the freshmen together, all the sophomores together, all the juniors together, all the seniors together, I intermixed them so that the seniors were now training the juniors, who were then training the sophomores, who were then training the freshmen.
Hmm.
So I made them have some buy-in. I made them have some skin in the game. So that was one of the ways I did it. Then I just started doing some extra stuff. We had dining ins, so a formal event where people dressed up. We had a nice dinner, and then we had some event. And in my case, what I did was I made the dining in about the seniors. That was when they got their branch. So we pinned their branch, their infantry, armor, aviation, quartermaster, or whatever branch they got. That's the first time they got to wear it.
Wow.
Then we had military balls. So I made sure that everybody in the program, got dressed up. They could bring their date. We paid for it all. Went to a nice place. The first one we did, kind of interesting. We went to the USS Alabama, the battleship, and we had it in the officers' mess. That's where we had the dining in, or
Wow.
the military ball. Now, we quickly outgrew that. We couldn't do that the second year because we had more people than we could fit in there, which is a good thing. So we did those kinds of things, and I started a mini camp. So I brought all the new freshmen in 4 days, 5 days before the freshman orientation started, so we could start teaching them what it means to be an Army ROTC and what's expected of them and what the standards are, and issue out their uniform. So teach them how to wear their uniform properly, all those things before school ever started, before freshman orientation ever started.
Hmm.
So those things kind of indoctrinated them into the Army culture, like basic training does for enlisted soldiers.
Then what type of expectations did you set for, and I want to go both. I want to go the people that worked for you, you worked with, and then, the cadets themselves. How did you set expectations and what types of expectations,
Yeah, well,
did you set?
we explained right away what the standards are, the Army values, and just integrity. You got to know, just like the West
Nobody
Point
uses
Motto.
that word anymore.
Yeah, I know, and then and it shows, doesn't it? We just like the West Point motto, we don't lie, cheat, or steal, or tolerate those who do, and so we made sure that everybody understood what it was that was being expected of them, and and we counseled people on that every semester. At the end of the semester, we do a counseling for everybody that was in the
Wow.
program and say, okay, here's the things you're doing well, here's the things you're not doing so well, and remember, here are the 7 Army values and what we expect of you. And I will tell you, we had a young man who got caught cheating on an exam on campus, and we kicked him
Military
out of the
science
program.
exam?
No, it wasn't an ROTC exam. It was a history exam, and
Wow.
we kicked him out of the program.
Wow.
Either you have standards or you don't.
Yeah, but and that's why I said, I like the fact that you use the word integrity because I don't hear it being used, or do I see it as much as, we would like to, or as much as probably, we did in the past. And
Yep,
so,
I agree.
and like I said, I'm 53 and I don't care how old you are, but
Yeah,
I'm
I'll be
saying it,
60 in January. So,
well, happy birthday. It's just that it would be something that I would like to see more frequently, and the fact that you upheld that in your company and with the people that you were mentoring
yeah.
is just a blessing to see and to know that
But
that's actually real.
you have to, because if
Yeah,
you don't, then it just goes down the slope. I mean,
yeah.
you got to have standards. You got to enforce them. Because if you don't enforce them, then you don't have standards.
Well, my final go around is to talk about outcomes, and outcomes can be seen in different ways. And you talked about I think you tripled or
More than
quadrupled
tripled. Yeah.
quadrupled the number of cadets, but that's just that's just a quantity. It's just a number.
Yeah.
What were the real outcomes
Yeah.
in the
That's
transformation of this program that you took charge of?
yeah. So one of the other things that I wasn't happy with was our performance at the summer camp. So part of ROTC is the advanced camp. It's a 45-day leadership course then it was at Fort Lewis, Washington. Now it's at Fort Knox, Kentucky.
Okay.
But the cadets go out there. Every cadet who's a junior, going to be a senior, goes out there in the summer between their junior and senior year. And that's 5,000. Like last year, I think it was 5,500 and something cadets went out to Fort Knox. Again, when I was running the ROTC program, they all went out to Fort Lewis. So all my cadets were going out there and they were coming back and the scores were horrible. They weren't pass, they would pass, but all of my cadets were finishing below the 50% tile. And I said, that's going to stop. And so I grabbed my MS3 instructor, who was a great, well, he wasn't the MS3 instructor before I got there, but I knew who I wanted to be my MS3 instructor. And I called him in and I said, Master Sergeant Powell, this is what we're going to do to fix this problem. And I quoted Master Sergeant Powell in the book as well. I mean, he was an amazing man. It still is. I mean, he and I still stay in contact. And he immediately started doing things, and even things that I didn't even think about. I mean, it's just amazing what he did. And our cadets started finishing a little bit higher and a little bit higher. And by the time I left, after the third year, I mean, our cadets were finishing we had cadets who were finishing in the top 20% in the nation. So, it wasn't just the numbers. We were also increasing the quality of young men and women that we were commissioning out there into the force and into the world, the nation. Because again, a lot of my cadets, I had a cadet whose father owned 7 car, places where you buy cars,
Right.
car lots. And so he had no interest in going on active duty. He wanted to run his family business. So he wanted to serve his country. So he came, he joined the National Guard. He's in the Alabama National Guard, and he served his country. I told him from day one, I don't care if you go on active duty or if you go in the Guard or Reserve. Service is service.
Wow, cool. So that's a lot. And what you're doing, so you left there, but now you're in Florida. And
Right.
are you
So
doing
when
the same thing in Florida?
I'm the recruiting officer now in Florida. So
Okay.
I had to recruit at South Alabama because I didn't have a recruiter. But here I'm just a recruiting officer. I don't run the program. There's an active duty lieutenant colonel who runs the program, and I'm on my 5th lieutenant colonel now in the 14
You're
years.
outlasting the whole.
Well,
You're
that is
outlasting everybody.
by design. That's the way it's supposed to be. I'm kind of like the continuity of the program, but yeah, so when I retired, I was the associate director of a food bank for about 18 months, and an amazing organization that did some amazing things. But then they offered me to come here and do this. And when I took over this program, as a recruiting officer, there was 165 cadets in the program. Last year we started with 344 cadets.
So I think the moral of the story is whatever you touch turns to gold, at least in some way,
Well,
shape,
I
or
would say
form.
what everything, but yeah, and it comes down to in the book I talk about it, in my presentation I talk about it. It comes down to results. In the real world, results do matter. And my father instilled that in me as a young man. And he used to have what we call the 75% rule in our family. And he said, Oak, if you're doing something and you aren't doing it better than 75% of the people doing it, then you need to do one of two things. You either need to figure out how to get better at it, or you need to go find something else to do, because obviously it doesn't matter to you.
I don't even know what to say to that.
And I live by that standard, that saying, and I pass it on to my kids, and hopefully they'll pass it on to their kids.
And
Because
hopefully you pass it on to the cadets wherever you are.
and I did, and that's one of the things that was on my wall. I had 75% rule written on a whiteboard in my office, and every cadet that walked in, I say, where are you on the 75% rule?
Wow,
Are you happy where you are, or do you need to work harder?
that's incredible. I like that. I enjoyed our conversation. There's a lot of wisdom in your talk, and of course, you've been around and you've got the experience. And I really appreciated the fact that one, you wrote the book, and two, we have an opportunity to dig into the life of Oak
Yeah, absolutely.
and really get to understand what it means to be a leader, what to do as a leader, and how to build trust with people. And I think
Yeah,
that's most
it's,
important.
it's huge. It really is.
So, how are you building trust now these days?
So I do a couple things, and it's not rocket science. Number one, I am a firm believer you don't lead from behind your desk. You lead from walking around. So
Well,
I mean,
wait, we got a story there because you told me a story the first time we talked. Remember what that story was?
oh yeah. So I had a boss who retired a 3-star general, and so obviously way smarter than me. Um, and he told me one day, he said, Oak, never, ever, ever turn down a chance to go get your own cup of coffee.
That's the story.
He says two things happen when you do that. Number one, you show people that you're human, that you don't have to be waited on, that you can actually go get your own cup of coffee. You know better than anybody else. And number two, you on your way from your office to the coffee pot and back, you stop and you talk to people. And he said, if you're lucky, you got 2 or 3 different ways that you can get to your coffee pot and back, because every time you go a little different way and
Yeah.
you talk to different people. So you lead from walking around, not from behind your desk. Nobody's wants to follow somebody who's sitting behind their desk. And then, so that's the number one way that I think that you build trust. The number two way is that I tell people every day, and I try to do this even with our cadets in the program. I try to find one cadet, or if I tell people, find one person in your organization every day, just one, and find out one new thing about that person. Nothing about work.
Mm-hmm.
Find out something personal, their spouse's name, their kids' names, what sports do their kids play, their hobbies, their likes, their dislikes, where they grow up. Just find one new thing every day about one person in your organization. You will see the trust start to blossom. It's amazing, because now they think you actually care about me, not about work. You care about me as a person.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's huge. And if you do those two things, I think you'll be amazed at how the trust just starts to grow in your organization.
Oak, I totally agree with you. And I don't think there's any better way of ending a conversation than with that story, because I was working towards that story the entire conversation because I loved it the first time I heard it, and I wanted people who's listening to this conversation to hear it as well.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for this conversation. Hopefully we get to do it again because I think you have a lot of wisdom to share, both
Anytime you want,
in
anytime
this
you
book and
want
out of the
feedback on, you
book.
just got to ask.
I appreciate that. Well, let's say goodbye to our audience. And of course, this is season 2 of the Question Guy podcast. And we'll see you next time. Take care.